Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Pe Aleph. So today's daf is sponsored by Blima Slitsky in loving memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Chaim Shimon and Blima. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran family for the refuah shlema of the wonderful Hadran Chavruta Rona Fink, Chana Bat Malka and her family, ill with a heavy case of influenza, which has disrupted the tail end of a lovely shared vacation. Wishing Rona, Ray, and the entire family much strength and full recovery soon, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, we are going to get started with the bottom of Pei Amud Bet. The reason why we're getting to this is we're going to deal entirely today with 10 takanot, which really are 11. We're going to have to deal with that. 10 takanot, which Yehoshua instituted upon coming into the land of Israel, or as they were coming in anticipation of potential problems. Okay, we're going to talk about this very, very fascinating topic. We're going to have the list of the 10, of which you should just know there's a number of different interpretations of what each of these even mean. I don't know that we're going to spend the time going through all of them. I already know because I did Hebrew, it took a long time. So we'll see how much we get into and how much we don't. But on each of these takanot, the Gemara is then going to delve into. So we're quoting a Braita, then we're going to go one by one. And with each one, they're either going to explain it better, limit it and say, oh, this is only in the following cases, or raise a contradiction. This doesn't make any sense based on something we learned somewhere else. So that's basically what we're going to do for today. And then we're going to have two final questions. One is, wait, but there's 11, there's not 10. How do we deal with that? And the last question is, but there's other takanot that Yehoshua instituted, and why didn't they make it into this list? So Tanu Rabbanit. Asara, we're at the last few words on Daf Pei Amud Bet at the bottom. Asarat Naim Hitna Yehoshua. There were 10 conditions, which really means takanot. Those are all sorts of takana, something that people usually institute to fix something, right? We had all about tikkun olam and all that to fix a situation. Number one, shayu mar'in b'charashim. They allowed people to allow their animals, and this is why this is here, to graze in a forest, even if it's a privately owned forest, because someone ended up. Okay, now this is going to be the basic idea here of all of these, or at least most of these. Because people ended up, some people ended up with better land in one way than other people. And basically, I'm going to call this like there's all sorts of resources, whether they're natural resources or close to natural resources, that might have existed. What was Yehoshua's main job, right? Besides conquering the land, then dividing up the land. Now, if you end up in a portion that doesn't have enough forest area, so you can use someone else's forest for your animals to graze, because where else are you going to find space for your animals to graze? So you're allowed to do it in someone's private forest even. Okay, what we're going to see, not always, and this is right, what about the whole thing about stealing? And right, so first of all, once it makes a takana, you're not stealing. But also, now remember, then general, we've been talking about, you can't have these animals, small animals, because they're going to graze in other people's fields. Now here, we're not talking about fields. We're not talking about that you planted all this crops and your crops are growing. This is a forest. This is more like a dense forest with a lot of trees. It's not necessarily going to destroy the trees, and therefore you have to allow them to graze there. This whole thing about animals, I just want to be clear. People could keep animals if they had them outside, right? Like shepherds are always wandering in basically areas where there aren't really fields of people. That's where it's allowed. In unsettled territory, that's where you can have flocks of sheep and all that, but you can't have them in the mainland, in the cities, which anyway, you're not going to have them, or in the fields that were around the cities. It has to be kind of in this empty area. But if there's a forest there, then you're allowed to allow your animals to graze there. Umilaktim itzim b'stotehem. You can go and collect wood, okay, or branches. We're going to have to see what kind, not really any branches, from someone else's field. Umilaktim asavim b'chol makom chutz mitzoltan. You can always pluck out grass. Okay, this was for animal fodder. Anywhere you want, other than ones that are growing near tiltan, which is translated as fenugreek. Going to have to see why that is. You can take, blanking on the word right now, shoots that grow out of trees. Okay, I want to take a picture and show you the shoots growing out of my olive tree, because at the base of my olive tree, there's all these shoots growing out, and that's exactly what we're discussing. You can take shoots out because people, okay, now this actually happened to me. My neighbor asked me, he said, can I take some stuff from one of your trees? I want to graft it with one of my trees, and it won't ruin your tree. I promise you, it won't cause any harm. Like, this is exactly what we're discussing. So you can take a shoot growing out of someone's tree, which, is not going to cause them much of a loss, in order for you to graft that or do some sort of, plant it in your field to grow another tree. But other than grofiot shel zayit, if it's an olive tree, now grofiot, there's different interpretations. Rashi explains it's 2 fists worth. So you can't go down at the very bottom, close to the ground, 2 fists full. Okay, so this is why I wanted to take a picture of my tree, because it has all these shoots growing out right at the bottom of the tree. I didn't measure whether it's 2 fistfuls, but you can't cut the ones that are at the bottom of the tree. Okay, again, there's a big debate what exactly is going on here. Is this a Ma'ayan that comes from someone's private property? Is it one that comes from a city? The main point is there's a Ma'ayan that starts a spring that starts off in someone's private property, or perhaps belonging to one city. And then it streams, okay, and perhaps that's even underground and not even exposed. And then when it gets exposed, it's already, when it comes out, it's already in someone else's city. So the people of that city are allowed to take the water from there, it seems like, without having to compensate the owner. There's a bit of a debate about whether they have to compensate the owner for the use of the water or not, but they have access to that water because the water comes out in their city. Again, there's a bunch of different interpretations what exactly is going on here. Anyone can fish in the Kinneret, in the water of Tiberia. Okay, now this was in the tribe of Naphtali. We're going to see this later in the Gemara. Were the ones who, that was their land, okay, where the Kinneret is. But everyone else is allowed to go in there with a fishing rod. But what can't they do? They can't put out kela, a big net, because that catches a lot of fish. That puts them at an unfair advantage. The amida tasvina. So now there's a bit of a debate about how to read this line. I'll give you 2 interpretations. Either you can't put out these big nets that basically prevent the boats from being able to come to shore, because it's blocking boats. You're causing a public hazard, or a public, not a hazard, but a public problem that people can't get their boats onto shore because you put out these big fishing nets that basically will block the boats from getting in. Some people say you can't, they read it totally differently. Put out a kela is nets, that's the same. But yamida tasfina, and you can't put it on a boat. Okay, and that means if you put your boat out into the middle of the Kinneret and you put a big fishing net from the boat, you can catch a ton more. It gives you a very unfair advantage. Okay, so either because it's causing a problem and blocking boats from getting in, or because you're getting way more fish than anybody else, and you're using a boat to do it, and that's kind of unfair. Part of this, what this whole Bright is doing, I'm stopping in the middle to just talk about this, but it's saying there's resources that are out there, whether they be fish, whether they be water, right, whether they be shrubs, which we're going to talk about, the eitzim that people really collecting from shrubs, whether it's forests, all these natural resources that exist, we have to share them around and somewhat make everyone on equal footing. Okay, it's not fair that you ended up, Naphtali, with the Yam Shel Tveria and you have access to all these fish and nobody else does. So it's not, you'll see, it's not exactly equalizing, but it is giving people opportunities to be able to access things that aren't necessarily in their area that they were given. Okay, you can see why this would also, right, create a lot of rivalry and fighting, inner fighting. So Yehoshua wanted to prevent this by saying you have to be friends with each other. You have to be willing to let other people take some of the resources that you have, especially ones that were kind of handed over to you. Okay, that you happen to just get lucky that was in your area. Nifnim la'achorei hagadel. Okay, this could be interpreted in a bunch of different ways. Afilu b'sadem le'ar karkum. Okay, with this turmeric, so it's not good if people, okay, it seems like we're not talking about urinating, we're talking about defecating, because urinating, I assume people didn't really need to do in private areas. They did it anywhere they wanted, especially the men. But we're talking here that you can go behind someone's fence to have privacy and do your needs, even if there's karkum there and it could possibly destroy the turmeric. Okay. So that's one possibility. But we're going to see the Gemara understands this totally differently, which is that what's the gader? The gader is made up of stones. Now, you might remember from Masechet Shabbat that people used stones to wipe themselves in those days. So the Gemara is going to say that actually this means that you're allowed to take stones from somebody's fence, even though it might create an opening in their fence, in order to use it. And that's because of kvod habriot, okay? It's just a necessary thing. When you go to the bathroom, you're going to need to wipe yourself. So we allow you to do that. And again, take use of something that belongs to somebody. Here, it's not even a natural resource. This is, now maybe there were just a lot of stones in that area. That's why they had a stone fence, but still they built a fence and you're allowed to actually take it in order to allow yourself to wipe yourself. Interesting halacha. This is, Rashi explains it in the time in between where you do the harvest, okay, it's around Sukkot time, and then you start planting. Now, until the second rains come, if people walk in your field, it's not going to ruin anything. Nothing's growing yet, right, above ground. So it's not going to ruin anything. So basically, you have to make your fields open areas that you have to allow people to walk through your fields, to basically take shortcuts, right, to go through your field so that they can get from place to place until the second rains come. Once the second rains come and then people start stepping on then we're going to start, right? The dirt the soil will start to move around, and then they'll start stepping and ruining your crops. But as long as it's not ruining your crops, this is what we call, what we learned much earlier in the Masechet, ze neheneh v'ze lo chaseo. They benefit and it's no skin off your back. Umistalkim l'tzidei hadrachim mipnei yitidot hadrachim. Okay, this seems to be understood. There's different interpretations also, but let's go with the basic one, which is in the rainy season, or again, remember, they didn't have paved roads. So in the rainy seasons, the roads got all messed up, right? There was lots of rain, and then there would be puddles and there would be indentations in the ground, and that would cause kind of, a hole in one area and a big, like the dirt would kind of stand up in a different area. So where the dirt would kind of stand up, this is called yitedot. So basically what they're saying is if nobody paved the road after the winter, you might remember there was a Mishnah in Masechet Shkalim about how they would pave the roads before the Aliyah Regel. But let's say you weren't on the path of Aliyah Regel and nobody dealt with paving your road, you'd end up with these big, protrusions in the middle of the road, and it wasn't comfortable for people to walk there. So in the private areas, which were on the sides of the road, it was already, everyone took care of their own stuff, but the public stuff perhaps less so. So you're allowed to walk on the sides of the road, even if it's through someone's private property, in order to avoid the difficult walk in the middle of the road. If you get lost in the middle of somebody's vineyard, and you can't really walk through a vineyard because there's vines growing all over the place, you're allowed to cut them. Okay, it seems to be you have to compensate the owner for the fact that you cut them, but you are allowed to cut them in order to find your way out of there. The last one, okay, you can go back and count, but this is number 11. Trust me on this, so you can go back and see. I'm not going to go through them all again, but a mate mitzvah, if somebody dies and there's nobody to bury them, this is called a beit mitzvah. It's a mitzvah upon anybody who sees this body to help bury it. But in order to make it easier, they acquire the space where they died, and basically you can open up the ground underneath and bury them right there. This is in order to make it easier for people to take care of. We want to make sure that people take care of this dead body, and therefore we say, okay, you don't have to drag it to the cemetery. You could be far from the cemetery, so we allow you to bury it right there in its spot. This is going to be contradicted by some other source when we get to it later. Right, let's go one by one now. Number one, Amarav Papa. La Amaran, maybe we'll do this as we go along one by one. We'll count them. Okay, so this is number one. Amarav Papa, La Amaran ela daka b'gasa. Aval daka b'gasa b'gasa lo, v'kosh ken gasa b'daka lo. Okay, they're using tricky terms here because all along we've been talking about be'ema daka and be'ema gasa since we started our mission. Be'ema daka are the small animals, be'ema gasa are the big animals. But here they're using daka and gasa both for the animals and for the forest. You could have a dense forest, right? Or you could have a sparse forest, okay? So daka is going to be where you don't have a lot of stuff in the forest. So when we allow you to use someone else's forest to have your animals graze there, we mean your small animals in a big forest, okay? Where there's a lot of things there for their animal to graze. Aval daka b'daka, small animal in a small forest or or a sparse forest, vigasa lo, and a big animal, even if it's a big forest, we don't allow. And koshken, all the more so, gasa b'dakalo. And of course, we're not going to let a big animal graze in a small or sparse forest. Okay, that makes sense. So that was a limitation. Number one, we limited. Number two, milaktim etzim b'stotehem. So you can go gather twigs from somebody's garden, from somebody's field. Lo amaran ela b'hizmi v'higi. Okay, limitation number one, only thorn bushes and stuff, not nice bushes full of fruits and all that. No, only thorns and those kind of bushes. Ava'al b'shar etzim lo, but not other kinds of trees. Now, those were kind of useless, right? They used them, the only thing they really used them for was kindling. If you remember, we talked about this with the kindling, we use these terms. And by the way, only if they're attached to the ground still. Why? If the owner already cut them and wants to use them for making a fire, well, then they did all the work already. You're going to come in and just take them? Of course, you can't take them like that. Third limitation, even if they're attached to the ground, we're talking about moist ones, right? Like it just rained and they're very moist and they're not so usable right now for kindling. And you have to dry them out. If they're already dried out and they're ready for kindling, you can't take them. And the fourth limitation, you also can't take it out with its roots. You can only cut it and then it'll just grow back, right? So it's not a huge loss for the owner. It has to be attached to the ground. It has to be that you're only cutting the part above the roots. It has to be that they're moist, and it has to be only these kind of bushes and not fruit bushes or other kinds of nice bushes, but ones that are just thorny. Okay, we're up to number 3. Now it sounds like, so you can always take grass other than if it's fenugreek, if it's growing near the fenugreek. Now that seems to be because why? We assume because the grass is good for the fenugreek, otherwise grass is probably bad. Okay, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't, right, it's not useful. But apparently with tiltan, it seems like it's useful. So they're saying, lememra, wait, this one they're going to raise a difficulty with. The first two we limited, now we're raising a difficulty. Are you trying to say that tiltan ma'alula hasabim, that grass is good for tiltan? Uriminu, but there's a contradiction in another source. It says in the following source, Tiltan sha'alta iminasavim en mechayvino tolako. You have to understand the background here. We're talking about kilayim. If grass grows near tiltan, that's kilayim. Now, generally, they would announce, I think it was Rosh Chodesh Adar, they would announce about kilayim. Everybody has to uproot your kilayim. Then they would come around and they would check everybody's fields and they would say, oh, you have kilayim. And they would warn you, you have to get rid of it. And they would go around like really like policemen and say, you have kilayim in your field, you have to do it. But we don't force the owner to get rid of the grass that's growing next to the tiltan. Why do we not enforce this law? It was a very fascinating concept. Because we know that people are going to do it anyway, right? How many times I always found this annoying when somebody gives me a criticism that I already know. Right? It's annoying I'm planning to do it anyway. Like, why are you bothering? I know that. I plan to take care of it. So basically what they're saying is first of all, it's a waste of their time. Also, it's not just people don't like to be criticized about things they're anyway going to do, but it's also a waste of the time of the Shlech Beitin. Why waste your time going to tell someone something, right? The only reason to do it is because you think people aren't going to take care of it. But of course, people are going to uproot the grass that's growing next to their tiltan. Why? Of course, because it's bad for their tiltan for the grass to be growing there. It weakens the tiltan. So that seems to be the opposite of what the Braita that we started with said. So Amar of Yumi, I'm going to have 2 resolutions to this contradiction. Lo kasha kan lezera kan lezirin. There's 2 ways that you could be growing tiltan. One is because you want the seeds. And if you do that, it needs nourishment and the grass is taking the nourishment away from it. So then we're going to assume that you're going to uproot it, and that's the one about the kilayim. But kan lezirim, by us, it's if you want the stalks. Now the stalks, you need the grass. Okay, we're going to see it right now. Lezera kashula sabim demak kashula. For seeds, the grass is bad because it takes away the nutrients. But our Braita that was talking about that you can take the grass other than in a field of tiltan, was talking about a field of tiltan that you were growing for the branches. You wanted not the seeds of it, you wanted the tiltan itself. Lezirin ma'alula. Why? Why is it good to have the grass there? Now it grows like a vine. Now, how do vines grow? They have to grab onto something. So if you have a bed of grass there, it makes it much easier for the vines to grow. So that's how it, right? It has kind of a bed on which to spread, right? To grow its for the vines to, well, I can't think of the word, but in Hebrew you call it hadlaya. It's I don't know, there's a term for it, for how the vines basically grow. So they have nothing to take hold on if you get rid of the grass. And that's why the grass is good for it. That's the first potential answer. Second answer, if you're growing it for humans, then you're going to, here, we'll read it inside. If you're growing it for animals to eat, well, then they eat the tiltan and they eat the grass. So you want to keep the grass there, and that's when the grass is needed. That's what we said in a field of tiltan with grass, leave the grass if you're growing the tiltan for animals, because the animals will eat the grass and they'll eat the tiltan. But if you're growing it for humans consumption, you want to eat the fenugreek, well, then the grass is bad and you're going to get rid of the grass. So that's why that's the kilayim source. How on earth would I know? Like if I'm a shliach beitin, or I'm a person who wants to go into your field and take your grass, how do I know whether you're growing it for humans or you're growing it for animals? You don't have a sign up. This is for humans. This is for animals. So how would I know? If you have nice, neat rows, it's growing in nice, neat rows, then you know it's for humans. If it's lo share mashare, you wouldn't waste your time planting things in nice, neat rows if it was just, you just wanted it to grow wild so the animals would eat it, and then you know it's lebehema. We're now up to number 4. Okay, so we can cut, right? If you want to graft for your field, you want to take one of my shoots, you can take my shoots as long as, seems here, you don't go 2 fists from the ground. Pershu Rabbi Tanchum Rabbi Bryce Mishum Zaken Echad. So Rabbi Tanchum and Rabbi Bryce came and explained in the name of one of the elders. How now we want to know, okay, again, bit of a debate how to read this, what this is exactly referring to. This seems to be referring to if I want to cut off a shoot, okay, either how much of the shoot I can cut off, how much I have to leave of the shoot. There's a bit of a debate about what this size that we're going to be talking about is. But now it depends on what kind of tree, what kind of growth we're talking about that I want to cut. So if it's bezayit, kibetza. So let's just translate it as we're talking about how much of the shoot. Now, before we were talking about how high off the ground it needs to be growing. Now we're talking about when I cut the shoot, how much do I need to leave of the shoot for the owner? So I need to leave a kibetza. There's a bit of a strange shiur for this because the betza is usually how much amount of food we're talking about in egg bulk, but seems to be let's say the size of an egg. I guess the height of an egg is the amount that you need to leave. Excuse me a moment. Bekanim with big fanim, things that grow like vines, then minapkak ulamala. So when the vines grow, there are these little knots that get created as they attach themselves. So from the knot and above, you're allowed to cut. Because again, you're leaving enough for it to regrow. Ushar kolilanot, all other trees. Interesting to think why olive trees are different than all the other trees. I don't know the answer. But all other trees, minubo shelilan, velo min chudo shelilan. Even this is a debate. What exactly ubo and chudo mean? Rashi gives 2 interpretations. We'll go with the first. First interpretation of Rashi is that the small, like more softer branches you can cut. The big thick ones that are more the base of the tree, it's unclear whether he means the trunk or even the big branches that come directly from the trunk, those you can't take. Okay, so if you're going to take branches, it has to be the smaller, less important ones that can grow back more easily. And again, now, by the way, in case I didn't say this, again, we're coming to limit, right? So the first 2 we limited. The second one we brought a difficulty on. I'm sorry, the third one we brought a difficulty on and resolved it. This one we're back to kind of now we kind of explain some other element of it. Maybe you would even call this explaining, because now we're explaining other laws having to do with this. And now we're going to limit these laws. So we're doing both explaining and then a little bit of limitation. So only from these kind of branches, only this amount, right? You have to leave this amount still when you cut it. Then, mina chadash she'eno oseh perot v'lo min hayashan she'u oseh perot. You have to cut branches that are new branches that haven't yet produced fruits, but you can't cut branches that have fruits growing off of them. Mimakom she'eno ro'eh takama, another limitation, from the part of the tree that's not facing the sun. As we all know, the sunlight makes it grow better. So the part that's facing the sun grows much better. So therefore, when you're cutting the branches, cut them from the part that's not exposed to the sun. Turning now to Amabet, not the part that's facing the sun, right, which is a pasuk that's showing basically that opposite the sun is where the produce is going to grow the best. Right? And again, it's funny, they always prove it from psukim rather than scientific proofs of, we all know that this works. Okay, next one. Number 5. So Amar Puna v'noten lo damim. Well, now he says, if you're going to, this is where I said before, if you're going to take the water from this spring that sprung up from somebody's private area, or our whole city is going to be benefiting from the other city, well, then our city has to pay money to the other city to compensate them for the fact that the spring was originated from their territory or from an individual's property. But late hilchata kavate, but the halacha is not that way. Okay, they basically say we reject this limitation, and we say no, you don't have to pay. This is water that streams into our city. It doesn't matter where it came from. It's a natural resource. We have access to it. We don't have to start paying you for it. Number 6. The next few words I'm taking out based on the Gra and based on the fact that it seems like it's accurate to take it out, because we're right now quoting the Braita, and the Braita didn't have any words past this in this takana. So this seems to have gotten added by accident from the next line, as you'll see. Tanu Rabbanit. Now this Braita seems to a little bit disagree with our Braita, because it's going to date this to before the time of Yehoshua. Not that Yehoshua did this, but the tribes themselves discussed this among themselves and decided about this. And then the question is going to be, according to this other Braita, it's not clear. Is there no takanot of Yehoshua, or is this takanot of Yehoshua was a little bit something else? And again, this leads to many different interpretations. It's fascinating. I think that there's so many different interpretations here of what each of these things mean and how to read this. So Tanu Rabbanit. So originally, the tribes is trying to say, before Yehoshua came and made this takana, the tribes already had agreed with each other that they wouldn't put these nets in, okay, again, either to block the boats or nets on boats, because that would be an unfair advantage for anyone. Now, some people explain tzadhu is specifically Naphtali. In other words, again, this goes back to, remember, Yehoshua said everyone can go fishing with a fishing rod. Okay, that they could do, because that's one by one you're catching fish, not a whole bunch at a time. So it's possible to explain this, that Naphtali, though, because it was in their domain, they were allowed to put out nets. Now, it could be they still couldn't put out nets that would block boats, or they still couldn't put out a net on a boat, but there's a difference between, right, there's a range between fishing with a rod, which everyone else was allowed, and fishing with those huge nets or nets that would block the boats. But there's regular nets that could catch a bunch of fish that aren't these huge nets. And it sounds like, because it says tzadhu in the individual, it sounds like maybe they're talking only about Naphtali, or maybe it's talking about anybody is allowed to. And then, maybe the takana, it could be, it's very unclear what the original, I'm sorry, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of lack of clarity here, what was done before Yehoshua and what Yoshua's takana was according to this Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, Yamashal Tveria, another Braita having to do with this, with the Kinneret, which is called the Yam, the water of Tveria, because obviously, right, Tveria is on the water there, on the Kinneret. So here we get it inside, even though I told you outside, but it was in the section of Naphtali. So by Naphtali and the brachot in Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe blesses the tribes, one in the pasuk of Naphtali, it says it's going to have Yam, okay, the water, and Darom Yarasha, and south of that they will inherit. So what they understand this to mean is that even though they didn't have all the land going all the way down to the bottom of the Kinneret, they were allowed this strip. Okay, Maloch Hevel is like the width of a rope. They were allowed a strip in the water that only they could fish there. Okay, in the Tveria, that was kind of their domain. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omil, Tlushim Shebaharim. Okay, now we get a more general braita, which is anything detached. Now, before we said detached is harder to let people pick, right? Because if I already cut my thorn bushes and I did all that work, you're not allowed to take it. Here we're saying the opposite, but about some other situation. When they got into the land and they conquered the land and they found, so they go into a field, this is what you call, you have a war and you take the booty. So they saw a field with all this cut produce. So anyone could take it, even if, let's say, we're fighting the war and it happens to be in Naphtali's land and I'm from Ephraim. So I can take the stuff that's detached. That's what it means here. Tlushim shebaharim. Now, if it's detached, and it's in the mountains, okay, specifically in the mountains, they're saying, anybody can take it, except for grabs, because they didn't do the hard work to detach it from the ground. It was from the people who were living there before. But anything that's attached to the ground, you weren't allowed to take. That belongs to whoever's land that's going to be. Again, you see they're trying to strike this balance between making things equal, but also saying, no, but this is yours. So they distinguish with talush and mechubal. And then they're telling you that all the tribes, though, everybody had different types of terrain. When they say Negev here, they don't mean the Negev as we call it, right? The Negev. Obviously, not everybody had land in the Negev because only the people living down there and who got the land down there. What they mean is that there were different types of land, and each, right, whether this is 100% true or not, but each nachala, each section that each tribe got had a mix of different terrains in it, okay? Mountainous regions, valleys, land you couldn't really grow stuff on, land you could grow stuff on, all different types of land. Shene'emar, where do we know this from? A pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, Punu se'ulachem ubo har ha'emori, go to the mountain of the Emori. Ve'et kol, right, that was one of the tribes living in one of the nations living in the land at the time. Ve'et kol shchenav, and all their neighbors, which we'll get to in a minute what we get from there. Ba'arava, b'hal, b'shvela, b'negev, b'chof hayam. Okay, here describing different types of terrains, right? The arava, the mountain, the shvela, the lower lands, the negev, and the chof hayam, and the water. Okay, v'gomer. V'chen et hamotzei b'kna'anim u'b'prisim u'b'amorim shelifnehem, shene'emar ve'el kol shchinav, alma shchinav hachi havlu. From there they learn that all the neighboring nations who were also living in the land of Israel also had a mix of all the different terrains. And therefore, this is again a way of saying it was somewhat, again, it has to be somewhat equalized. First of all, not everybody really lives on the Chof Hayam. Okay, not all of them had, right? No, technically speaking, they didn't all have beachfront, territory. But they're trying to say that there was a mix and it was done somewhat fairly. Okay, obviously, we all know siblings fight about you got this kind, you got that kind. And what Yehoshua is really trying to say is it was right, well, this isn't Yehoshua, but the Braita is trying to say it was somewhat equal and everybody had a mix of different types of terrain and different types of land. And also, it's trying to say that, all the takanot were to make things more equal. And even if you didn't have this, well, you can go access it maybe from somewhere else. And, they have to kind of let you have access to that. Okay, that was number 6. Number 7. So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, and this is what we said. It sounded like maybe you could go do your thing in someone else's field in order to have privacy. But here they say, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Lo nitzcha ela. What this really means is li told him and atzur. This is what I mentioned the Gemara is going to do, which is to take a stone out of somebody's fence in order to wipe yourself. Rav Chisda v'afilu b'Shabbat. Rav Chisda says even on Shabbat we allow this because of kvod habriot. Usually you wouldn't be allowed to do this. First of all, what are the potential malachot here? There's a machloket. Either you're soter, you're taking apart a building, which you're not allowed to do because you're taking apart the fence, but it's not really taking apart because taking apart is only a malacha if you're going to build it. Okay, so that's one option. Other options are, now I forgot, some possibilities brought. Either it's muktzah, because it's stones. That's when we got into this whole discussion. And there's another possibility that somebody mentions, I forget. Okay, anyway, Marzutra Chasida Shakilu Mahadir, he would take it and put it back. Okay, he would put it back where it was. He would use it. I hope he would clean it and then put it back. But Amarle the Shame, some people have the word lemachal, some people don't the next day, because let's say it was Shabbat. Then on the next day, it would say Zil Shirke, go put it back in and kind of glue it, cement it back in its place. So he would kind of put it back as it was before, which doesn't sound like you necessarily have to do that, but he would make sure to do that. Now we're going to have a bit of, okay, I said before that we're going to either explain them, raise a contradiction, or limit them. This one, we're going to do a little something different, which is we're going to start to look at the perspective of the Babylonians, because these were all instituted in Israel. So now they say you could walk in private, right, in private areas, as long as it's before the second rains, because it won't ruin people's crops. Well, Amar of Papa, v'haididan afilu tal kashin. Says, but by us in Babylonia, we know there was a lot more rain in Babylonia. We'll get to this in the whole sugya in Bava Metzia. They had a lot more rainwater, and even the dew was already moistened. It was such good dew that it would moisten the land so much that it would ruin it if people walk through. And therefore, in Babylonia, you really can't walk through people's property. We're up to number 9. And you would basically, people would move out to the sides because of these protrusions in the ground. So you could walk on people's private property on the side. Again, we're going to compare this to Babylonia. Shmuel and Rav Yehuda, who were in Babylonia, they were walking on a path. So he goes to the side. So the first thing that happens is Amarle Rav Yehuda. Sorry, this is the only thing that happens. I forget. The next one is in a different story. So Rav Yehuda says to him, wait, I thought Yehoshua said this in Israel. What, you're going to do this in Babylonia also? Amarle, Shani Omel, afilu b'chutz la'aretz. He says, this is the law in general. Forget about, you think, you're going to say maybe Bavel, we talked about this yesterday. They made Babylonia like Israel in all sorts of ways. He says, don't even think that I'm doing it because we're in Babylonia specifically. Anywhere in the world you could do this. This is just a basic law that there's these protrusions that make it very difficult to walk in the middle. You're allowed to walk on the side of the road, even if it crosses through someone's private property. And then Rebbe v'Rabbi Chia, second story, they're walking on a path. So then they go to the side of the path. And then they see this guy walking, head held high, kind of looking arrogant, walking right in the middle of the road as if saying, I'm better than you, because I will walk around these protrusions, even though they're kind of in the way, it makes it difficult for me, but I'm better than you. I'm not going to walk on the side of the road. They don't really like, right? Nobody likes someone, this is called Yehoshua. It's when people act arrogant, say, I'm better than you, even though he's keeping the halacha better, he's being more sensitive to other people, but it's in a bit of an arrogant way. So are the Rebbe Chia? Who's trying to, here you have Rebbe and Rabbi Chia, the two greatest rabbis of their generation, who's trying to make themselves look like they're better than us. Amarle Rabbi Chia, Shema Rabbi Yehuda ben Knosa Talmidi. So Rabbi Chia says, maybe it's Yehuda ben Knosa, my student. I know that he really just does things for the right reasons. He's not doing it to be arrogant. It might look that way from the outside, but I know it's not coming from a place of arrogance. Kimatu l'gabe, when they got close to him, Chazia, they saw who it was, Amarle, and they said to him, listen, and they saw it really was him. They said to him, Ilav Yehuda ben Knosa, gizartiu l'shakcha begizra de parzala. Said, if you weren't Yehuda ben Knosa, we would have knocked your feet down with an iron something. Okay, so basically, what does this mean? Some people say it just means metaphorically. Okay, some people say that they meant we would excommunicate you. Okay, some people say we would knock down your arguments like with iron clubs. We'd come and knock down any argument you said, because really nothing justifies being arrogant and saying I'm better than you, especially in front of Rabbi and Rabbi Chia. But because you're Yehuda ben Knosa and we know you're doing it for the right reasons, we're not going to reprimand you. But basically it's saying, be careful not to do that kind of thing. And other people certainly shouldn't do this. So that's really interesting in and of itself, that sometimes you think you're doing the right thing by keeping yourself in a higher, being more stringent about something. And even though we're allowed to walk in someone's field, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should suffer and go through the protrusions in the middle of the road. Here they say, that's very dangerous, because then you look like you're better than, especially if the great rabbis of your generation are doing what's permitted and you want to say, I can do better. that's really not appropriate. Okay, number 10. Hato'et ben hakamim, mefaseg v'yored, mefaseg v'oleh. So you can cut down the vines that are blocking your way to help find your way. Tanu Rabbanan. So now there's a Braita. Now the Braita is going to add something, which is not only if you yourself, but if you see a friend lost in the middle of a vineyard, you can cut in there, cut down the vines to allow them and show them the way. And likewise, if you yourself get lost, you're allowed to cut down vines until you get to the path or to the city. Why does it say and also if you are lost? In other words, it seems like if someone else can do it for you, of course you could do it for yourself. So why do you need that second part? To which they say, well, if you see your friend lost in a vineyard, you know the way. So you're going to just cut down and let them through. That for sure is allowed. But you might think, but if you're wandering around in someone's vineyard, it could be like a maze. You can end up going many different ways till you find your way, and you can cut down a lot more. Maybe we don't allow that. Maybe maybe we make you back up to where you started and walk around the vineyard and not through the vineyard, and that way causing less damage. That's why the Braita says you could do both. So that's the first thing we did. We added that someone else can do it for you. It's not just if you could do it yourself. Then we explain why it's even a bigger chiddush that you could do it yourself. Now they say, but wait, if you're talking about a friend cutting down for someone else, helping them find their way, hadoraitu, this is halacha doraita. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but we talk about returning lost items to people. So now they say, not only is returning lost items, but helping someone find their way is also a mitzvah doraita. If someone asks you for directions, they're lost, you're fulfilling a mitzvah doraita of helping them get, not be lost anymore, Titania, to help them find their way. Hashavat gufo minayin. How do we know that you have to help someone's body? This means someone who's lost, help them find their way. Not just about their items, but about themselves. Talmud lomar v'hashevoto. In the pasuk, should it say v'hashevota? Okay, v'hashevoto means you should return it to him, which means it's referring to their body. Okay, de'oraitu dekai bemetzre atu takin demafaseg v'olem mefaseg v'yored. So let me just, before we even get this is the answer. The question is, if that's the case, then what was Yehoshua mitakin? If you said you could cut through in order to help somebody to find their way, but that's halacha d'oraita to help someone find their way. So of course you can cut through. To which they say, no, not so clear. D'oraita, you have to help them find their way, but maybe you have to go back to the main road and go all the way around and help them find their way that way, but not necessarily cut through somebody's vineyard. The takanot of Yehoshua was you could even cut through someone's vineyard. Umeit mitzvah kanam komo. Last one, 11th one. Mate mitzvah, it requires the space where they died, you can bury them right there. Uvemini. Last one, we're going to have a contradiction. If you find a dead body on the street, you don't bury them in the middle of the road. You move them either to the right or to the left. Now it's going to depend what's on the right, what's on the left. If there's stabor, if there's a field that wasn't plowed, or stay near a field that was already plowed, mifaneo stabor. We try to have you do the least damage possible. So we say, put it in the field that wasn't yet plowed. Stay near stezera, if it was a plowed field or a field that they already planted in, mifaneo stay near. Put them in the plowed field. Hayushtehen blot, if both of them were not plowed, or shtehen yirod, or both were plowed, or shtehen zurod, or both were planted, right, on the right and the left, mifaneo l'makom sheyirtzeh. Then you do it to the place where it was already, wherever you want. You get to choose between the two because there's no difference. So the question is, if you say they kanam komo and they get to bury them right where they are, why are you moving them? And why do you have to start choosing between this one and that one? Doesn't make any sense. You should be able to bury them right where they died. So Amar Bivi, b'mutala lametzal, mitoch shenitam lefanotom fanei lechom lechom shirtzeh. He died kind of going through the length of the street. So you already have to move him because you're not going to bury him over the length of the street. It means no Kohanim are going to be able to cross that road ever because the whole body, right? The body takes up the length of, right? Or it leaves a little opening on the side. It's going to make it very impossible because any Kohanim that go over there, they won't be able to walk over there because they'll become impure. So once you're already moving it, then we already have, values game, which one is better, which causes the least damage to someone. But if they died on the side of the road, you bury them right there. Okay, but if they're mamash across the road, we don't allow it. So now we have our 2 questions I said we're going to have once we're finished. And these are 11, not 10. The fact that you walk on the side of the road when there's the fact that we allow people to walk through your road when it's not going to cause any damage, and we say, you have to let people shortcut through here. Actually, Shlomo said. How do we know? Because we're going to see a pasuk in Mishlei. So they say, Kedetanya, as it says in the following, if you already took all the crops from you reaped all the crops, you cut them, and you don't allow people to walk through your field. What do people say about you? What is this person, right? Look at how much this person can gain, and look, right, the one who wants to walk through. And what is it hurting this person at all? It doesn't hurt him in whatsoever. Seems inappropriate. This is zeneh nevezelo chaser, right? They're benefiting and you're not losing anything. Alava katuv omer, the pasuk about you says miyot tov al tikare ra. Okay, if you could be good, don't be bad. Okay, if you have the easy choice to choose good, you should choose it. So, which the Gemara says, what pasuk are you talking about? Miktiv miyot ra al tikare ra, miyot tov al tikare ra. Is there a pasuk that says that? No, there isn't. Well, they say there is. Ktiv ki agavna. It says the following thing. Something like it. Don't prevent good for other people, giving good to other people when it's no skin off your back, right? When you can do it very easily. Okay, last question. The 2 lake, are there not more? Vaha'ika, and I want you to think about the differences between these takanot and the ones we've discussed already. Okay, I'll give you my thought about what it is, and then you can think about your own differences. Vayika to Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Yehuda mentioned the following thing, and all these takanot are going to be said in the name of Yehoshua as well. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'shatot tza'at zvalim, we actually learned this before. Adam motzi zivlo l'reshut harabim, when people are making the fertilizer, you could take your stuff out. Tovro kol shloshim, kadei she'en yishof b'raglei adam v'rabaleg b'ma. You can leave it out for 30 days, so the people trample on it. As people tread on it, and the animals tread on it, it softens it and it makes it better for fertilizing. Yehoshua gave people rights to use public space for their needs. This is a little different from natural resources, right? This isn't using resources. This is using space or people for your own public, for your own private needs. It's a little different. We'll talk about more differences as we go on. He's going to list 3. It's a stipulation of the court, meaning everyone has, it's a basic law. If your bees that you had a whole beehive to make honey, and then they flew onto someone's branch, you're allowed to cut their branch and get your bees back. And you just have to pay the value of the branch to your neighbor that you cut his branch. We'll see a Mishnah a little bit different than this when we get to it later in our Masechet. We'll discuss the differences when we get there. But if we're walking on the road and your honey dish breaks, since honey was worth more than wine, you can force me to dump my wine, give you my vessel to save your honey. And then you have to pay me back the value of the wine. If we have 2 loads, and let's say my donkey collapses and I have flax and you have wood, your wood is worth less than my flax. So we take my flax, put it on your donkey, we leave your wood, and then I have to just compensate you for the amount of the wood. And here comes the key. Yehoshua basically gave the people the land with these stipulations. Basically, you have to help each other, right? Someone's in time of need, you need to help them. That's different than resources. This is more like individuals helping individuals, right? Needing to step up their game to say, okay, there's an individual next to me, I have to see their needs, I need to help them. So the answer is bi'chidai lo kamrina, which the commentaries translate as these were mentioned by individual people. This is Rabbi Yehuda said this, and Rabbi Yishmael ben Asher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka said the other ones, whereas our Braita was just said unnamed, it meant everyone agreed with it. And these were takanot that were said by individuals. But I think there's something more here, because I think this is also individual needs. That was more communal needs and communal resources that we're giving to groups of people. Whereas this is very individual. It's an individual case where there's a particular need. It's not like a global need that everyone, has problems with their honey dripping out and they have to take the wine from someone else. I think that that's a difference. You can think of others. With here, we're going to stop for today. And basically, we saw the 11 takanot. We dropped one from the list because we said Shlomo did it. We added a bunch more and said, why are they not on this list? Because this list isn't talking about those type of things. Or really, it's, according to the simple reading of the Gemara, because they were agreed upon by everybody, that Yehoshua instituted them. And these were just individual people said that this is what Yehoshua did. But again, I think there's differences between the lists. And then you could say these are of one type and those are of a different type. And with that, we'll finish for today. Very interesting topic of, all these things that Yehoshua thought about to try to kind of create equality, at least somewhat equality, in the division of the land, which again is something we know would lead to fighting, inner fighting, and it's not fair. And why did they get that? And anyway, lots of food for thought. Wishing everybody a good day.